There's one specific thing that EA and BioWare could not afford happen in the lead up with this new Dragon Age installment, and it's exactly what has transpired. The game is divisive. There obviously already has been an abundance of controversy surrounding this game for years, which only intensified in the last few months with questionable design choices coming to light. The underwhelming quality of Mass Effect Andromeda, the abysmal drama-filled looter shooter that they should have never made Anthem, and the mass exodus of senior staff and big talent names already made me skeptical that what we were looking at with the Veilguard was a sad imposter of a once-beloved developer. And following the release of very controlled reviews by Electronic Arts, it only created a more muddy picture with massive red flags all over the place. Some of the scenes and decisions made with the Veilguard are baffling. The dark fantasy side of this franchise appears to be gone. Want to be mean, be an a-hole. I guess that's no longer an option, which somewhat makes sense with where priorities seemingly were placed with the narrative design of this game. For a studio that used to tackle real-life issues with nuance and care, it seems in this modern day they instead have chosen to hit us over the head with a 4x4 and then cry bigot if you dare deride any of this content for what it is. CW level drivel that almost feels disrespectful to compare to the earlier complexity of this franchise and its explored themes. You don't need to have played this, but merely reviewed a few scenes to say many other modern games from Cyberpunk to Hogwarts Legacy to Baldur's Gate 3 to so on and so forth have done a far better job conveying the ideas that BioWare's new modern day writers lazily tried implementing. Some of the scenes being shared are truly insane with how they were clearly written by someone that spends too much time on Twitter and likely has a job lined up with Kotaku after this gig is over, which somewhat makes sense that the person behind this infamous article worked on the Veilguard. No joke about that at all. An RPG developer that used to be known for elegant, spectacular writing. Most of the reviews, they don't even bother mentioning the quality of the writing, and some that do, some that call it shallow, the main narrative, still arrive at a very confusing review score. Maybe it's just me, but I would think quality writing matters a bit more in a story-driven game like this, but I guess not. Especially when you have your God of War light combat, 10 out of 10. Frustration is what I feel with this new age of BioWare, along with dread that the reviewers' opinions that I often align with are saying and showing with examples the exact things I did not want to hear. But at least Android Wilson, the CEO of EA, is here to celebrate what definitely wasn't a carefully coordinated effort to ensure a solid overall review score ahead of launch day. They can easily hit back saying, well, we gave a few critical reviewers like Skilp and Mr. Matty Plays access, while neglecting to mention that they shunned so many more. An illusion of fairness that allows EA and BioWare to still take a victory lap in overwhelmingly positive reviews and hopes that in this Rotten Tomato Metacritic age that casual users will see the overall score and go out and buy it day one. A strategy not unique to this game, but an example of the quiet manipulation game that everyone plays by in the entertainment industry because PR departments' jobs aren't for fair reviews, it's to ensure that they and their product looks the best it can, no matter the quality, slop or not. Confidence, in my eyes, would be allowing as many voices to be heard, something that didn't happen here. Yet Android Wilson tells investors about breakout potential, and he praises reviews. Speaking with investors in EA's quarterly earnings call just the other day, Wilson reflected on some of BioWare's troubled recent history, which has been defined in part by the failure of Anthem. The multiplayer looter shooter game Wilson described as very, very different than something that would be known as a BioWare game. And whenever executives say this, I always wonder myself, maybe that's the problem. Maybe there was a reason why you guys should have never pursued this, but they still did. In the wake of Anthem, Wilson said a big shift happened that saw BioWare really returning to BioWare type games, really returning to BioWare strengths. And they did this when almost a lot of the talent that made BioWare who they were in the early 2000s, they're long gone. A lot of them before even Anthem released because they didn't want to make that type of game. They wanted to make story-driven experiences, and that's why they ran to other studios. And that is why nowadays BioWare is just a shell of themselves. With hundreds of the talent that made them who they are, Mass Effect, Jade Empire, Dragon Age, and so on and so forth, KOTOR, those games were made by a lot of the talent that no longer is there. And I think that's important to note when we're talking about BioWare and this return to form, because this is a new age for this company. BioWare has rallied around what made BioWare a fan-favorite studio and a fan-favorite brand, and the types of games they make. Incredibly rich worlds, incredibly nuanced characters, okay, really powerful and compelling stories with camaraderie and friendships and relationships and decisions that matter in the context of gameplay, Wilson said. And I think it's been that return to what made BioWare great and giving the studio time to deliver against what makes BioWare great in the context of the Dragon Age world is what amounts to Dragon Age The Veilguard, which is a, glowing endorsement from the CEO of the company. Now, Wilson did continue further, saying, looking ahead to The Veilguard's release, Wilson praised its solid reviews and suggested that it had breakout potential thanks to BioWare's existing fanbase and the relatively clear release calendar. We're going into a market with limited competition for this category of game given some of the moves that has happened across the broader industry, Wilson said, which is, yes, a reference to Ubisoft's Assassin's Creed Shadows, which was moved recently to February of 2025. And say what you will, I would not be surprised that this game does sell millions of copies. How much so, we'll see, because Dragon Age The Inquisition sold over 10 million copies in its lifetime. Can The Veilguard achieve that? We'll see what happens. This is a big name franchise that has not had an entry in a very long time, and I do wonder how, casual audiences will take to this game. We'll see what happens, especially once we have more reviewers gaining access and giving their own opinion on this game. But it is worth mentioning right now, this is a top seller on Steam. It is there in the top 3. I am convinced that it's still going to sell quite well, but we'll see what those user review scores are like, because while critics have been, overwhelmingly positive, users might have a different story to say. I mean, you can look to Starfield as a great example of that. I keep bringing it up, but last year, critics absolutely love Starfield, users not so much. Now, it is also worth mentioning that there has been a lot of questions about the review process. You heard me alluding to it in the intro, and we had Kirk McKean. He's a journalist for SI. He had a critical review of Dragon Age The Veilguard, and he said about the narrative that, EA and BioWare are being selective with review codes. He says it's bollocks that BioWare EA blocks access for legit criticism. Doesn't happen. Well, I have proof. I have actual messages with specific employees at EA that said that they didn't like my messaging and didn't want to give me a review code for that reason. So that's absolutely a lie here. He said, I gave Anthem an absolute pounding and I've written a mixed review for Veilguard. Maybe it's because your outlet is shit, as evidenced by putting, I guess they put Mark Kern in their video to back up your point, which, yeah, they've been coming after Fextra Life. We talked about that in the last video, in which a lot of individuals that attended a preview event over the summer for Dragon Age The Veilguard were promised review codes by BioWare. Say what you will, I don't know if it was a strategy within EA, but they definitely limited those review codes. And some individuals that gained copies, I guess, early still have actually been hit with DMCA claims. Again, I'm not exactly sure the extent of this, but it is quite clear that there is some silencing going on here. Is it because of spoilers? Is it because of specific contents that people are sharing? It's unclear, but this is something that reminds me of The Last of Us. There was leaks that happened beforehand, and then Naughty Dog went into overdrive, in which they were just taking down any and everything, even when it was, legit criticism that should not have been impacted by DMCA takedowns. There's an abuse of the system, and I'm not entirely sure if that's what's happening here, but there is definitely a PR blunder happening here. Whoever at Electronic Arts managed and was responsible for Dragon Age The Veilguard getting everything in sorts, they screwed up badly here. And say what you will, this only has 55 reviews. I find that absolutely insane, especially when you have massive releases. Very often it's in the hundreds before launch day. And I personally believe that they did want to limit those critical voices, but even now, these review scores are a little lower than I expected. An 82 here on OpenCritic, with just 76% of critics recommending the experience, which isn't too far off to the review scores of Star Wars Outlaws, although the top critic average was a decent amount higher. Like I said, I do suspect that this is probably going to get lower in the coming days, especially when individuals that didn't get the access beforehand by EA will buy the copies themselves. We have seen BioWare somewhat going into damage control about their next game, Mass Effect 5. Michael Gamble is the game director for this next installment. Seems like a really cool guy, and he's already getting ahead of the the concerns surrounding the art style of the next Mass Effect game, if it's going to be making the change that Dragon Age has done, because Dragon Age The Veilguard very much is having that Fortnite aesthetic, a lot of the character design, very baffling decisions made with that. But Gamble took to Twitter recently, he said, one thing that Mass Effect fans can expect to see kept intact is the realistic art direction of that series, as opposed to the stylized visual approach, that's one way of describing that, of the new Dragon Age game. Mass Effect is photorealistic and will be as long as I'm running it, Gamble wrote on X, formerly known as Twitter, and then he also said Mass Effect will maintain the mature tone. Those are all great things to hear. Gamble also additionally said on his Twitter account, lots of people asking me about Mass Effect now that Veilguard reviews are out. Both are from the studio, but Mass Effect is Mass Effect. How you bring a sci-fi RPG to life is different than other genres or IPs, and has to have different kinds of love, which I guess is his response to some of the criticisms with Dragon Age The Veilguard, specifically with the art direction that they went with. And then he said, regarding a tone question, Mass Effect will maintain the mature tone of the original trilogy. This is all I'm going to say for now. And then somebody said, yeah, as I pointed at the Fortnite, style, please don't Pixar me like you did with Dragon Age. I'm not sure I agree with the Pixar thing, but Mass Effect is photorealistic and will be as long as I'm running it. And say what you will about the next Mass Effect game in terms of, art direction or whatever, but there's already been changes made to the franchise that have me concerned. Even in Andromeda, we saw some of that, as this Twitter user points out.
An all-female race.
My species only has one gender.
My species is monogendered. Male and female have no real meaning for us.
Some Asari prefer male pronouns, while others...
And then there's Andromeda.
My people have several pronouns to identify themselves with. Perhaps I should prepare a document.
Yeah, that's why, the whole, BioWare just certainly, changed, being woke or whatever. It's not true. I mean, they've been that for a while now. And some of the problems already originated years ago with Inquisition and Andromeda, in my opinion, once the doctors left. I don't necessarily have high expectations for the narrative design for the next Mass Effect game, especially with what I've seen so far for Dragon Age The Veilguard. It is also worth mentioning that we do have clips coming about in which people are sharing, again, this game is going to be picked apart, all the pieces, nitpicked to death, but I do have to say, some of the aspects of this game, it just feels like there's such hand-holding so much with game design nowadays, especially on the AAA front. It's like a lot of these development teams do not have trust in players to do the simplest of things, and here's an example of that. This is supposed to be a puzzle in the game, in which, these are Dragon Age Veilguard puzzles designed for smart players who want to challenge, and it's pretty much, you have to pick up an item right there and put it there to get the bridge to go forward, which you got to do a little bit more than that. That's just lazy. It's kind of absurd that development teams are... Yeah, and as somebody pointed out right here, we took for granted the Skyrim puzzles, which, yeah, there was technically some elegance there, I suppose, even though they were mocked to death years ago. But yeah, this is just... We can do better, BioWare. We can do better, please. And there have been, of course, lots of conversation about the 6 and 10 review scores, because that's the big thing, that's what's happening here. Even a lot of the most positive outlets, there were actually quite a few detractors, and I am very surprised by that. But Eurogamer was one of those, outlets. They said that they absolutely love the game, considered some of the best BioWare's ever produced. They gave it a 5 out of 5 stars, and they're entitled to that opinion. But as Richard Hogue of Hogue Law says, he says 6 and 10's hard to know what to expect, honestly. And then, like a lot of individuals have been posting to me, they say, well, look at the overall review score right there, dummy. It's an 84, which is so absurd. Look to the actual contents of these reviews, what reviewers are actually saying. It says, it's largely positive reviews, though. Are you afraid the game would be too woke for your liking? And then as Hogue elegantly says, nope, I'm concerned that even the positive reviews seem largely positive for reasons I don't care about. Action, spectacle. Thank you. Well, hand-waving at the things I do, plot, world, and that the negative ones highlight issues that I'm likely to have as well, which is exactly how I feel about this. And Hoglog did continue. He said about this paragraph in this article from The Guardian, which was a review of the game, which actually was quite critical. He said, but the writing, the heart of previous games, is surprisingly mediocre, while the new combat style gets repetitive fairly quickly. Hogue says, this is the common refrain that the culture warriors are getting lost in whatever they're fighting over. An RPG with bad/bland writing is worse than an action game with bad writing. BioWare was never going to match Action Specialist, but if they've lost the plot on plot, well, he's right. And then he brings up this specific portion of the Guardian's review. I think they gave the game a 6 out of 10. He says, I mean, this is not a hostile reviewer, folks, but this matches up with so much of the legitimate criticism we've seen. And he takes a portion of this Guardian review, which is a 6 out of 10, saying the central story is the least interesting thing about Veilguard, which, come on, that's pretty fucking damning. Both in its narrative and gameplay, many quests have you endlessly slotting crystals into receptacles to open doors or vanquish blight boils pulsing, fleshy growths that keep you from traveling to a place to fight a monster. This isn't out of the ordinary for Dragon Age, but coupled with dissatisfying cameos and by-the-numbers gameplay, it left me feeling disappointed. And I almost feel like this portion, I don't know how you arrived to a 6 out of 10. I almost feel like it would have to be lower, but maybe I'm wrong. I do think that some of these reviewing outlets have different standards for the reviews, and the game almost has to be unplayable to get anything lower than a 6, which maybe shows a massive issue with reviews overall with scores. But they go on to say the companions save the day, the quality of the writing does vary wildly, but it's fun to get to know your team, and they go on to mention that romance options don't immediately go in hard on awkward flirting, and instead often just constitute the nicest things you might say to someone who's struggling. Though the game does have a habit of ruining the fun by jumping in to say, careful, you're being romantic. Are you sure you want to commit to a romance? Which, come on. It's the hand-holding. I hate this. It just feels like it just won't stop with this industry. The bigger annoyance here is how they behave when you take them on a mission together, when they will make small talk like two colleagues meeting at an office party. So, Tash, you hunt dragons? I hunt monsters. It's a far cry from Dragon Inquisition's banter, which even that alone I had many issues with. But yeah, like I said, the review process for this game has been an absolute mess. We have IGN's review. They gave the game a 9 out of 10. It was a glowing review. But you know the one thing that's not mentioned at all in this review? I've looked over it, I've read it multiple times just to make sure there's nothing really necessarily talking about the quality of the fucking writing. You know, a central aspect of a role-playing game, a story-driven game like this. It's not mentioned here at all. And this is why I look to other reviewers, especially YouTubers, for their critiques of games like this. And Skillup's review specifically, this has been something that's we talked about in my last video, but there's portions of this that are absolutely stunning and damning about this modern age of BioWare. There's the specific moment I didn't talk about last video that I want to talk about here, and he specifically says this.
So remember how in most BioWare games you could talk yourself out of trouble if you said the right things, made the right threats, if you put the work in to ingratiate yourself to a faction, if you have the right party member by your side at a crucial moment. We used to have stats for charisma and speechcraft that would make it easier whether we're trying to persuade or intimidate or deceive. Veilguard has none of those things.
Yeah, and that's the BioWare game. That is the BioWare game that we all fell in love with. That's why I take so much issues with the comparisons and the many articles I keep on saying this is a return to form for BioWare. What BioWare? The original BioWare doesn't exist anymore. And these individuals, these journalists are just lying to us with the contents of the reviews, gaslighting us in many ways.
You cannot talk your way in or out of any situation. There are no stat checks that will test your powers of persuasion or whatever.
Yeah, and we get this stupid little dialogue wheel that so many other RPGs or action RPGs have been using. This was a mistake. They need to stop doing this, I swear.
Every outcome is ultimately determined by force because there is no scope for you to determine it by any other means. This was really typified in this mission, which seemed like it was going to be a real standout. This is towards the back end of the game, and we have to infiltrate a meeting of cultists, and we're supposed to be undercover. To this point, there had never ever been any mission like this. As I said earlier, every mission is just following someone, going to a place, killing enemies, and so the promise of like a
lazy quest design, but with this there should be some sophistication with you having to get in there, especially with you being undercover.
Stealthy undercover mission was really exciting because I was desperate for just something else. So how does this actually play out? Well, firstly, we're undercover, but we leave our
so you have to sneak in.
Faces uncovered while we walk around this encampment, and we're basically the only people not wearing a hood, and we've been fighting this faction for the last 30 hours, so you'd expect they know our faces by now, but anyway. Eventually we come to a dude and he's blocking the way, and
and this is inexcusable writing that I don't think any other reviews are talking about. And this is what I mean with the contents of some of these, glowing reviews. I want to hear specific examples of why you think the writing, why you think this game is spectacular. And that's the problem I have with a lot of the modern day journalism. It's just, I really like the writing. That's it. That's all we're getting out of them. Give me fucking examples of this. Give me examples of stuff that you actually liked about the narrative and why gamers should feel encouraged by this new Dragon Age. But I feel like that's what's missing from a lot of the conversation from many of these outlets, and they're doing a disservice to their audience, in my opinion.
I expect this might be a moment where I have to smooth talk him, and if I say the wrong thing, maybe the jig is up and it's time to fight.
Yeah.
But nope, here's what actually happens.
Stop. Who are you? I don't recognize any of you.
What is that delivery?
You don't recognize me?
What is going on with the... Okay, it's like Starfield facial animations. We live in 2024, BioWare. What is going on with these facial animations?
Magister. Lady,
Appalling. They'll hire anyone these days.
So the best...
I know he's not going to bring this up, but the way that the voice... It's so bad.
my dude can conjure in that moment is, and then Nev takes over and does all the talking for us. No chance for me to have any input into how this goes down, and when it ends, we stand right there, in the middle of these goons, talking openly about how we plan to murder the gods they worship.
It's Elganon, not Gillenane like we expected.
Shame. We have unfinished business with her.
Next time I see her, she's dead.
And moving over to Twitter, there's many individuals like this tweet almost has 10,000 likes on it, but it's another example from Skillup's review of things that we were all concerned by and concerned that it was going to be included in Dragon Age The Veilguard, and it very much is. It's a problem here. And it does feel like a lot of developers are just not doing the bad guy. They're not doing the bad guy thing anymore. They're just completely avoiding it, and it's just de facto nice guy in an RPG that just makes no fucking sense at all.
There is no bad guy option here in Veilguard. There's only nice guy, there's nice guy who's a little bit more jokey, and nice guy who's like ever so slightly more stern. That's
the thing, even in some of the positive reviews that we've talked about, like the last one from Mortisimal Gaming, we're going to get to that in a second, but even he admitted, like, yeah, there's no way of being a bad guy. I don't know how that's not a knock on the game. I genuinely am a little confused by that, especially, you know, if you want to do multiple playthroughs, it seems to, you know, drastically limit that if you can't even be a bad guy.
It's literally it. Those are your only three options. Sometimes there's an additional option that's meant to be like the angry option, but what the game does, and this drove me fucking nuts, is it takes the edge off the dialogue option you've selected to make it something more friendly. Like this clip when some asshole bureaucrat barges into the conversation making demands, and I want to say, who is this fool? Because that would be an antagonistic thing to say that might result in some conflict. Instead, here's what Rook actually ends up saying.
Who is this?
This is Govern.
Who is this? Who is this fool? It reminds me of Fallout fucking 4. They did that, Bethesda. You would have like a certain expression that you're going to say in that dialogue wheel, and they would say completely different than what you intended. And that angered so much people. Are we not learning lessons, people? Like, can we actually learn a fucking lesson from any of these past games and the controversy associated with them? It just makes no sense why we keep on repeating these mistakes.
Eventually. They have concerns.
Or this example, when I'm trying to get the head of the Grey Wardens to listen to me, and I just reach...
Just listen, you idiot, okay?
...my wit's end.
Are you kidding me?
Are you kidding
I assure
me?
You, I am deadly serious.
That is not what I wanted to say. I wanted
So the illusion of, you know, being a bad guy, pretty much.
to call him an idiot, but I can't do that because Rook is incapable of saying anything that might offend or upset anyone. And this is very much the case with his team too. With the exception of one pivotal decision point, Rook cannot upset his team members in any meaningful way. In so many BioWare games and games like it, you could say some mean shit.
That's insane. I mean, say what you will about Bethesda, like, I just got done with Starfield, but if you kill a bunch of people, you're going to anger them. They'll never talk to you again. At least there's some consequence with some of the actions that you do. In this, they just said, no, we're not even going to do that with an RPG that's supposed to be central about fucking choice and consequence. And one of the biggest games last year did so much of that with Baldur's Gate 3. And yeah, as this user says, now I know why a lot of studios and their devs were up in arms complaining about Baldur's Gate 3 delivering too much and setting unrealistic expectations. Roleplay in your RPG? What do you think this is, 2009? This is a safe, comforting environment now. No bad thoughts or being a meanie. And that perspective is one that is only amplified with design choices like this.
Shit that would really piss off your companions, but here all you can do is offer support. Sometimes in a friendly way, other times in a slightly more stern way, but never can you say anything that might actually upset.
Yeah, and that's blasphemous in my opinion. The only logical theory that I can have about why so many development teams, it's not just BioWare, have been doing this in recent years, it's the Disneyification of role-playing or games in general. It's trying to be as family-friendly as possible to reach the wider audience, but at the same time they just do a disservice to their own franchise, in this case Dragon Age, by abandoning what this franchise used to be known for, which is the dark fantasy side of it. And then there's even more problems with this game. Mr. Matty Plays outlined some of that within his own review, and this is an example of it.
Tosh. And I feel like some reviewers are going to shy away from this character and any sort of critical conversation on Tosh because of the subject matter that this character tackles. However, I believe if we are to grow as an industry, if we are to grow as an art form, we have to be able to speak constructively about these characters without it always resulting in mudslinging. So I'm going to go ahead and get into this without
He's right on the money with that
whatsoever. So if you're going to place a message into a character like you do with Tosh, it requires nuance and thought to actually have impact, which I think BioWare did completely miss the mark on here. I'm totally for stories that want to bridge the gap of understanding and opening people's minds. Like when I was in high school, Gone Home was a pivotal game for me in opening my mind. It happens, that's why games are art and why these sorts of stories can be important. Now, to properly critique this, I'd actually like to look at a character that tackled tough subject matter with such elegance that it still impresses me to this day, and that's introducing Parvati from the Outer Worlds. Parvati was conceived by writer Chris Latoll as asexual before he left Obsidian Entertainment. This character was then placed in the hands of another writer in Kate Dollarhide. Now, Kate Dollarhide herself is asexual and spoke at length in interviews after the game's launch on how this character was equal parts terrifying and exciting to work on. She was able to put a piece of herself into this character and in turn bring it to a whole new level, but at the same time, it's scary to do that because you're showing a piece of yourself to people you've never even met before. Now, lived experiences drive the best of scriptwriters, whether it be our grief, sorrow, happiness, or everything in between. It's that,
I mean, sometimes, but there has to be a care associated with the work of art, and that's not always the case. We've seen that in recent years with a lot of games in which they just go way over the top with it. Just this year, Dustborn's an example, Saints Row last year, I believe it was last year, and many other releases that get way too over the head with their messaging, in which it seems too preachy, if that makes sense.
That thoughtfully and artistically conveyed sense of emotion that carries our favorite characters in our hearts. And as a result, Parvati resonated with asexual gamers who felt seen in a way an RPG or hell a game has scarcely or possibly never even represented before. At the same time, it wasn't the crux of her entire existence as a character.
That's true.
Parvati had wit, comedy, smarts, and a healthy...
Parvati was probably my favorite companion within the Outer Worlds, a game that obviously people have mixed feelings on, but I very much enjoyed that game, and I very much enjoyed Parvati as my companion. I think I had her following around me most of the time.
Dosage of being socially awkward.
Oh, beer. I guess, yeah, I can do that. Beer can be good, I bet.
The problem with Tosh is not really, to me, the character of which BioWare is conceived, but how they are handled. Tosh is written like ideas spawned from social media discourse as she barges into every conversation in quite possibly the most unlikable manner. Worse yet, it exposes problems with the game horribly, like not being able to be mean to Tosh.
Yeah, I was going to say that it almost feels like maybe there's a reason why they made it that you can't be mean.
Not being able to talk down to her for the way she behaves. It also spotlights what I view as a lack of communication between the writing team when Tosh's values are inconsistent.
I'm from Mervain. Not like I follow the Qun.
You've got the arm ropes.
Sure. I wear a lot of stuff. You don't get to tell me who I am.
Oh my god, they yell at us. We can't tell them to... Oh, that's crazy.
Doesn't matter anyway. The Antom don't follow the Qun either. Not anymore.
Then, 30 minutes later, no exaggeration because I have the timestamp for it, this happens.
So, the Dragon Hunter has a softer side.
The Qun says you take care of people.
Like, I don't know. To me, it sounds like in one moment you follow the Qun, in the other, it's just not fitting you. And
there's no consistency with this writing, and that's exactly what I feared, that this BioWare team would not be able to capture their past, their glory days, and that's exactly what appears to be what's happening here with the Veilguard. And there are other examples that other individuals have been bringing up. This is the screenshot we briefly talked about last video, in which you have this line from Tosh, which I guess she's confronting her family about her being non-binary. It says, "I just said, and I'm going to use they instead of she from now on," and I guess they tell her parents, though those are her pronouns, which definitely very preachy, very, you know, real life politics being put into this fantasy, and a lot of people don't like that type of stuff. And we saw Sophia Norwitz. She said, everything is too goddamn ham-fisted, and I'm tired of fantasy worlds existing as half-assed reflections of current times instead of actually being their own defined things. I do remember those times. The writing is cheap and lazy, simply put. I think there's ways you could make these sort of characters work, especially when you consider that the best fantasy and sci-fi stories shine a light on humanity's woes and or the human experience, but far too many writers can't properly do it to save their life. Modern writers, a lot of the past ones, there's some fantastic memories from those days. It's excruciatingly modern and in your face, and I feel like that's almost on purpose, and if you have an issue with that, well, they can just take out that B-word card and throw it at your face. We obviously saw, and then these are the moments that some of the journalists have been talking about, already warning about, saying, we'll warn you right now that shortly after Dragon Age is probably going to produce the most annoying discourse of the year with those guys regarding a particular quest line, and I'm pretty sure he's referencing this. I guess there's a quest line in which a character comes out as trans. Rook says, take a long look hard in it, kid. It'll always show the face of a hero who can get it done. It says establish transgender identity unlocks new dialogue options in future conversations. And yeah, I guess that's a major aspect of the game. And yeah, a lot of people are voicing opinions about it, saying that, you know, this is an example of BioWare grabbing modern politics and bringing it into their game. And then you have other individuals saying this is just a bigoted response. And that's what I mean. This game is embroiled in so much culture war stuff. And I will just point out for a fact, you have so many other games that tackle stuff like this, and you don't hear any of this uproar for a reason. That's because the quality of the writing is so much better. And then we have another article, CG Magazine. They gave the game a 10 out of 10, of course, but they say BioWare's made a conscious effort to become more inclusive regarding race, gender, and other social issues. They were already very much in that. A few of their stories this time around will have a great impact on specific audiences, and it's great to see a company jump into these issues head on rather than just making pronouns or including skin color. I'm sure a wake of people will have nasty things to say, but seeing more people be able to see themselves in video games is only good in my books, even if I don't relate to the stories directly. But this isn't them actually reviewing the quality of the content. That's just them saying, haha, let me give a clap to representation. What does that have to say anything about the quality of the writing? That's what's missing from this specific review. This is just them, CG Magazine, giving BioWare points for, you know, hitting on the inclusive category pretty much. But look, I've obviously voiced my displeasure so far with Dragon Age The Veilguard because much of what I've heard and seen, it has me extremely concerned, and I am worried that this game is going to be a massive disaster, in my opinion, from my experience. And when I see specific reviewers that I follow pretty much saying that they had to slog their way through it, that's just not good news for myself, especially since I'm probably going to be playing this very soon. But Games Radar, as they pointed out here, a lot of other outlets, a lot of other individuals are giving glowing impressions. We even saw Baldur's Gate 3, an executive saying Dragon Age The Veilguard is the first Dragon Age game that truly knows what it wants to be and absolutely compatible with my experience during Baldur's Gate 3. So look, my opinion obviously is not universal. I think a lot of individuals watching this probably will like it themselves, and that's okay. I don't think everybody has to have an agenda surrounding their 10 out of 10 or 9 out of 10 review for Dragon Age The Veilguard. Some people just like the game, and some of these games are made for them. Although I look to the past where this franchise originated, and it's a far cry from those days in my opinion. And that didn't just start with The Veilguard, it started with Inquisition years before then. And one of the more positive reviews for Dragon Age The Veilguard was Mortismal Gaming. We talked about it last video, and he's faced a lot of criticism for it. People calling him a paid shill. That's the same thing with all the other outlets from Eurogamer to IGN, and he did respond to that. I did want to show it here. He said, if you honestly believe that I would ever accept any form of compensation for a review, you obviously don't know me at all, and more importantly, you have no idea how anything sponsored or paid works. If I failed to disclose something like that, the FTC could fine me $40,000, my channel could get deleted, not to mention the obvious reputational damage. I have not received any compensation. I just like the game, and it's my game of the year in an otherwise underwhelming year. I did not even attend the preview again. I'm glad other reviewers have expressed their opinions about why they don't like it, because that is how reviews work, and people should see it from all angles. I said it would be divisive in this very video, and he's right. It is extremely divisive. Opinions are all over the place right now. And we did see another gaming publisher come about, somebody saying about Dragon Age The Veilguard, I doubt anyone is rushing to play Dragon Age, so it shouldn't be a problem, and then they pointed out that it's a top seller popular on Steam, and I am fully convinced that this game is going to sell. How many millions of copies, though? That's a big question right now. But yeah, the conversation, the outcry surrounding Dragon Age The Veilguard, it feels like it's just about to explode. It feels like we're not even quite there yet, and wow, this is probably the worst case scenario for EA and BioWare because they needed Dragon Age The Veilguard to not be divisive. And say what you will, but it has been an absolute PR blunder. You don't go about the review process limiting it to about 50 or 60 reviews. They were limiting codes. Whether that was intentional or not, it has created a perception, one that is not going to be erased from people's minds, and it is one that is going to continue to follow this game, especially if this review score starts to lower drastically, and I suspect it probably will. But anyway, are you planning to play Dragon Age The Veilguard or not? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. But thank you for watching. Make sure to leave a like if you did enjoy this video, or if you found any informative value. Consider subscribing for more videos like this, and I'll see you later.